Hi friends, welcome to, I would say, procurement and supply chain word. I know I use the word here as welcome to word, but basically when I'm talking in the word, I'm not talking economic word, I'm talking procurement and supply chain word in 2021. Relating to what we have got around with us is four experts around with us from wide range of sectors. So they will be covering all your questions and answers. I'm a moderator, keep in mind. Moderator means basically representing you guys. So we have around 350 people who have registered for this. We got many questions around. So those questions I've tried to condense it, and those questions I'll be posing up to all the best experts with us. And that's what the plan is around. Now we also did some survey some time back, I would call around, and the survey feedback also we got. So to start with, what I will do is I'll cover your survey feedback to all the participants around what you guys have told us. And then later on, what I'll do is I'll switch over to the panelists, the question what you guys have posed us, and I'll pass on the same questions to the panelists. And later on, the last thing would be the Q&A session. So this is how I divided the whole presentation into three parts. Now the key takeaways, if I take what we have kept for the key takeaways for today's session, based on the feedback from you around, I'm sure you must have seen in the previous wherever we have passed on the message to you, the lessons learned during the 2020. I know 2020, nobody wants to talk of. It was bad for many of the sectors around. So lessons, what we learned, the key trends in procurement and supply chain. I'm calling both procurement and supply chain because procurement is a baby of supply chain. Supply chain to me is a bigger thing, end to end. The linkage between procurement and supply chain operation, this is where we find, when we talk of supply chain, people think it is the logistic areas around. They forget about procurement and supply chain has to be linked together. All activity need to be linked if you want end-to-end visibility around. So the next thing would be the transactional and strategic integrations. If you look at the supply chain, to me still, I would love to hear from any one of you. Supply chain is still at a very basic tactical level. First thing, it is not integrated end-to-end. And then it is a very basic level. Very few companies I've seen must have gone to all the MNCs, most of the big MNCs around in India as a part of my work, either as a consultant, as a trainer. I don't think we are done at the strategic integration. First thing, it is segregated. It is not having a strategic integrations around. So transformation steps to digitalize, I would call, around the supply chain. Now, ultimately, what the message is coming from 2020, we have to become digitalized. So digital era is there already there around. Something which we were thinking 2 years back, 3 years back, all in small steps around, people saying, oh, it costs a lot. What do I do with ERP? What is e-procurement? They were mixing all those things around. But now I think most of the companies, I can see those who are leaders, they have made up their mind to move into digital. And our panelists will be obviously covering their experience on that part around. Now, let me put this also around the challenges which we got based on survey from most of you. The challenges which basically the lessons what we learned, and then that becomes the challenge for us this year. Lesson we have learned, but now it becomes a challenge. How do I do it? Everybody is talking of resiliency. So resiliency means we are going one step further than risk management. I know in the good old days, risk management. Now it's saying, guys, even something unforeseen like COVID-19, we have to be resilient. So resilient takes you one step forward around. Then the next thing, which is coming up very oftenly, all of you are very conversant, boosting agility. I remember when I went in 80s in my US, when I was doing my MBA, the focus was on lean and GIT. That's what we were taught around. And when we came out, we were teaching everybody same thing as a consultant. Oh, you have to be lean, you have to be GIT. But then now people have learned, guys, it's fine to be lean, fine to be GIT. I'm not against it, but you have to be responsive. So that means you have to be agile around also. That's the one came around. Next thing lesson we have learned is gaining end-to-end visibility. I think that we all have seen around. As procurement people, we were connected to tier 1 supplier. Tier 2, tier 3, we never cared for it. So now we want end-to-end. And end-to-end means you need different technologies around. Digitalizations, everybody's talking of Industry 4.0. So when we talk about Industry 4.0, then supply chain also has to be 4.0, procurement also has to be 4.0, logistic also has to be 4.0. So all of us should get conversant with 4.0, and we'll be again hearing our panelists what they are doing on this part around. Change management, this is very, very important. And I know Adia will be covering on this part around. Everybody says, okay, we have to train our people, fine. But the mindset of the people at the top level, whether they are really supporting you, the change mindset to me is the one big issues around. Doing a training is one thing, but change mindset is another one. Getting value for data. I think this one certainly has picked up. Data analytics, I would say in every procurement department, every supply chain department, there should be data analytics. If you guys have no data analytics, you're depending on IT people, you are too far off. So you need to have in your job descriptions, some people's job need to be revised around with data analytics around. Demand planning, I know Dr. Vivek Sharma is with us with a lot of experience in this field. He'll be touching on this part. Supply chain integrations. Again, I think integration is important around. I think Vijay Anand and others will also cover up around how do we integrate, remove the silos mentality. I think we're still saying, oh, I'm in logistics, I'm in this, I'm in demand planning, I'm in this. But at the end of the day, show is one. If I'm a customer, it has to be end-to-end. Relocation of production clusters, I think this is happening very good. India is trying under Atmanirbhar. That means we are trying to get away from remote. We want to be near our places around, or maybe reshoring around. Encourage the diverse sourcing, no single sourcing. I know when we used to teach strategic sourcing, we say put all eggs into one basket. You have a big volume leverage, but now we have learned, guys, volume leverage is fine. But when the bad days come like last year's, we could be in trouble. Next is greening, greening, greening. I had a chance to head this activity with UNICEF myself when I was based in Denmark, and he used to work with EU. I'm talking of in 82, 83, greening was very popular on paper. This we were doing a lot. But again, that word is picking up. Strategic procurement and strategic sourcing. I know strategic procurement is there, but on strategic sourcing is a big question mark. So that's what we have. I think I got the feedback from many of you around. It is again, I want to thank all the people who have given this feedback to us. I think this was very useful. It will set the tone for our presentation as well. Coming back to the next thing, what we have is, let me again introduce the panelists who are going to take the show further with us. So we have Brishban, you can see on the top. So Brishban is the head of strategic sourcing and supply chain, Asia Pacific region. For Uber, you know, is a wonderful company in this field in the managing supply chains. So he'll be covering up, and his experience goes back to around 20 years in different MNCs and different capacities. So he has covered widely from procurement to supply chain. So he'll be touching a few issues around on the various questions what you raised us. We have Dr. Vivek Sharma, whose experience starts from Intel with the chip making around, then went down with and he worked later on with Apple, well known for supply chain as a #1 company, and he was leading on supply chain, and now he's working with Global Foundries in USA on this subject around as a director of planning. Adia Jahasani is with us. She's a deputy director with CapEx procurements, but she has worked in procurement, supply chain, diverse areas around in her field with Vedantas and other company. Vijay Anand, I don't think he's known to most of you. I know he's a very active person, and he has been one of the active person in our award ceremonies. I've seen him. He's a global head of procurement of Tata Technology. He's very much into technology, let me tell you. So all the question I've kept for him to answer on the technology, what Tata is doing around, what other companies are doing. Before that, he was a GM with Wipros, and my association goes with him for a long. So he'll be touching on those issues. So well, friend, with this, let me get down to the very first question around, which I've kept basically okay. How have the last 12 months shaped your thinking about procurement and supply chain? So it's basically a warm-up question I've kept around. I know many of you have given us question. The question which we have received from many of you is touching, I know I sent a message only day before yesterday. From all the participants, I've got around 25 questions, but I doubt I can answer all of them, but we'll try to do the key questions around. The rest, we will send you the reply. Now, these questions are there around. So let me start with Vivek. This question around how have the last 12 months shaped your thinking about procurement and supply chain? Dr. Vivek, you want to say something on this?
Yeah, sure. Morning, everyone. I hope you guys are all staying safe. And from that, actually, that takes me to my answer. How do we think about procurement and supply chain in the new normal that we are facing right now? And I was actually thinking of going back to how my professional life was impacted, but I will actually give an even more current example. We are going through a phase of distributing vaccinations. Everyone is asking, when are we going to get the vaccine? When are we going to be able to access it? That is supply chain. Managing millions of doses. And if anyone was not aware of the value of supply chain, I think now even the common masses are thinking about it. You have to store it. It can only be stored in refrigerated freezers. Once it's in a hospital, once it's in a particular kind of refrigeration unit, it has to be, imparted to the patient or the recipient in a fixed number of hours. Otherwise, it goes to waste. So that's what we are dealing with right now. And you can think about that parallel in any industry. I come from electronics and semiconductors background, and it's become very clear that if anyone had doubts about regarding the operations part of the sales and operation process that every company runs, on the value of the OP part. Normally, people always used to think that S is a caps S, and then you have small OP, which constitutes the S and OP process. But now it has highlighted how valuable that operation component is, which is where this end to end of the operations is encapsulated by procurement and supply chain. So it's highlighted how important it is given the volatilities in demand in the supply that most of the companies have seen. And they need to, for us to be better prepared, this is a great profession. Some of the things Mr. Batra touched on, you need to be strong analytically, you need to go towards digitalization. So we'll talk through those as this conversation progresses, but those are my initial words.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek. Now let me switch over to Adya's Jhasani. Adya, you want to say a few words on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Batra, and good morning, everyone. So I think Vivek touched upon a very, very important thing. We're talking about the vaccine supply chain these days, and just a quick, I wanted to share this insight is that supply chain has been one of the most Googled word of this of 2020. So that really emphasizes how important procurement and supply chain has been. The past 12 months has clearly brought the spotlight on procurement and supply chain. It was just as if we were shaken up and put in the driver's seat to ensure an uninterrupted operations. I come from an essential commodity sector, which is oil and gas, which has a very high dependency on global suppliers. And at the start of this pandemic, we were faced with the stark reality that we had to ensure supplies and services while maintaining the cost of production. With most of our contractors in our businesses, they were invoking force majeure. We really had to implement new strategies within days, if not hours, to make sure that our operations remain uninterrupted. And it was like an all hands on deck situation, working 24 hours for us to support the operation. And that hasn't changed. And that has only got more emphasized in the last 12 months. So, clearly the supply chain related risks have increased in the past 12 months, and businesses have started realizing that without the support of procurement and supply chain, an uninterrupted operations is not possible. So really the shift from where you were a support function to what you're driving the strategies have clearly, this has been the great catalyst for putting procurement and supply chain in the driver's seat. The other area where I see the shift in the procurement's role is now we are seen as the chief collaborators, if I would say, post COVID, what happens is the collaborating with other functions and operations has increased. Earlier, what we were operating in silos, if you would say, with very little touch points on need basis. Now, because procurement and supply chain is really a pivotal function, so with all, the collaboration aspect has really grown a lot. So now demand and supply and operations and finance and IT coming together, and with procurement at really the linchpin of all this. So that is what I have seen a shift in the last 12 months in the procurement's role. The other way is, the importance of we've realized the importance of reliance on our business partners. So collaboration, external collaboration with our business partners, suppliers, or on our networks to understand what are the best practices, how are people turning around situation. So we've also, the role of procurement as a brand ambassador has become more prominent in the last 12 months. So these are a couple of changes or shifts in procurement role that I've seen in the past 12 months.
Thank you again, Dr. Adya. Now let me switch over to the next question, which is time to Brishpan. But before Brishpan answers, I will request all the participants, please answer yourself also on the chat box. You can open on the chat box and Ria will tell me later on what feedback has come from you guys. So this is for everyone. So Brishpan, you want to start with this quick one?
Yeah, sure. So rather than talking about the specific bullet points, what should be the trend, I would just talk about one thing, and you can see that in my background also. It says reimagine how we work, right? So this would be the theme. We have to look at each and everything that the organization does, especially in the procurement and supply chain. We have seen that there was an emergency situation. Not everyone could react in the same manner. Some kind of did great job. Some struggled because of either technology, or there were no processes, or there was a talent issue. So these are some of the trends I see coming in 21, that how do we react, how quickly we react, and how effectively we react to a situation. So I see a big shift happening in the way the whole sourcing and procurement organization and the supply chain work. And we'll discuss about it in detail as we move ahead. But there will be a fundamental shift I am seeing happening in the domain. Yeah.
Excellent, Brishpan. Now can I switch over to Vijayanand Chaudhary?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. And as the question says, what are the trends? While, there would be situations, not now, but even in future, I wish things would get better as soon as possible. But whether there's a situation or not, the procurement as a strategic function has been inching step by step. And with this scenario that we had, procurement has become a very strategic function. That's the latest trend that I would say. And coming on to the being strategic, rapid digitalization, because dynamic manufacturing and dynamic logistics, because things are going to change very quickly. And the other part is managing uncertain times, whether it's vendor risk management or understanding the supplier, being resilient, or being smart enough to really understand when someone would call out a force majeure on you, whether your strategic partners would remain strategic or not. Then uncertain political times where suddenly you realize that we cannot source from A place or a B country, right? So those are the different trends that are coming up. But the in short, dynamic logistics, managing uncertain times, and vendor risk management. I think these are the big trends which are on now, supported by rapid digitalization. So, anyways, we're going to discuss more about this in a few more minutes from now. So, that is what I would say are the trends.
Excellent. Ria, did you get anything on the chat box which we can share on this? Okay, if not, then later on we can address this part. So let me go down to the next one's question around, which is very important around. So whenever we join any SCM 101 class, any one of you has gone to supply chain management class 101, the first thing is taught is what is SCM is to manage, balance the demand and supply. Now, the word is very easy around to show the balancing of demand and supply. So demand has become, in the good old days, was very easily forecasted based on the past data. But now the world has become VUCA again, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and we have seen in 2020. So when we look from that angle around, so I'm going to pose this question to Dr. Vivek Sharma, who is heading on this side activity as a director in the US. So how they look around demand planning and how they manage it and how they master it. and his own experience from, again, Apple as well. Vivek, you can go ahead with this.
Yep. Yeah, sure. So, any end-to-end supply chain process, if you look at it, the very first step in a cycle is demand planning, because that sets 1,000 ships on their sail to, on their voyages, based on what demand plans you come up with. So it's very important. Um, Before I go into how do you master that, I would like to say that we are always in a VUCA world, right? You'd never have 100% certainty for what your demand is going to be. You always have volatility and uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. It's just that these days it's been heightened, it's been magnified because of the current global situation that we are in. Having said that, the fundamentals are still the same. You want your history to be the guide. You need to have some sort of a baseline, so that really highlights the requirement to be strong analytically. You need to be able to crunch large volumes of data relatively quickly, and you need to have access to this data so that your process is nimble and you can churn your demand plans sooner, and refresh them as you continue to get new information. But what's being highlighted now is that you can't just rely on a simple, let's say, Excel models, right? Like for some businesses that might work, but for the most complex supply chains, which, let's be honest, most of the businesses now are very complex. So you need to refine your more mathematical modeling. And what that is highlighting is a more of a need to start tapping into AI and machine learning so that your models become even finer and faster. So what that means is there's a requirement to upskill these requirements. So if you look up any job positions in demand planning, one of the requirements, a good to have requirements now definitely is machine learning. So to be able to model that, that's very important. And finally, from a business standpoint, if I switch gears, then you need to definitely have the capability for scenario planning. What that means is, again, it's a demand plan, it's a prediction, just like what's the weather tomorrow. No one knows for sure, but what you do is you come up with, let's say, a baseline scenario, then you, hypothetically speaking, come up with a high case scenario or a high risk or a low case scenario, right? So that way you have vision into what the three, for example, bands are, and between those three data points is where your demand is expected to be. And if you do your job right, that's more likely than not you will end up in that situation. So you will have a range of demand to plan supply for, and that will give you the agility, the nimbleness that you need, so that you're not over stockpiling and you're also not short on materials. So that those are some of the key things that you need to continue to do, um, to to deal with the volatility and the uncertainty of a demand planner.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek. Then we have another important question around the next one is, again, this has come from many of you. I would say many of the participants have certainly focused on this question in different words, but basically they want to see the future of procurement and supply chain, what needs to be done to remain competitive. So this is where I think I'm switching over to Brishpan, who has a wide experience in all these different companies, around 8 or 9 companies, mostly MNCs in all this field around. Brishpan, this is to you.
Sure, sir. So we talk about the future of the supply chain broadly. There are 3 to 4 things I would like to talk about. What our focus should be. The first and foremost will be how resilient is your current supply chain. And I think everyone has to now start thinking that in the time of emergency we had a lot of issues in terms of getting the material or getting the services. Especially on the material, we were not getting supplies from China, and our dependency went on to some local sources. So going forward, what should be the right mix of the local sourcing plus global sourcing? Do you really start thinking about the vendor managed kind of inventory again, which I know was kind of reduced over the period of time, because this was quite a popular concept around 10 to 15 years back. It does exist, but slightly died down, because of various other practices. So this might come back. One need to look at the transparency in the supply chain at not just supplier level or supplier level. So if you're just looking at that, where I was getting the supplies from, you may have to start looking at, is your supplier the right supplier? In case of emergency, will this supplier actually get the supplies to manufacture or not? So you have to look at a very, very resilient supply chain. Second thing I will talk about is the supplier relationship model has to be much stronger now. This has to be put in place very seriously. We have been talking about SRM for many, many years now, but when you look at what SRM is, generally they say, yeah, I mean, I talk to my supplier quite often. I ask him, is everything going fine? No, that is not the true SRM. You have to have the right SLAs, KPIs, quality matrices in place and start tracking it very seriously. Try to understand the capabilities of supplier. Try to assess the risk. What could be the emergency situations that might come for this supplier, which you can tackle. You have to start talking to this supplier to understand his capability. And one of the example which is everyone aware of is like Maruti manufacturing the ventilators, or Foxconn and others in China started making masks. Why they could do that? Because they had the right set of capabilities in place. They had the right set of the culture and the talent in place. They did not bother about what is the infra. They said, okay, I can do this, let me do this. These are some of the things that have to happen. So SRM has to be taken very seriously. One of the things that we saw during our pandemic situation was that suddenly there was a shift in the categorization of the supplier. Some of the class C suppliers, as we call them, which contribute to last 5 to 10% of the spend, suddenly became important. Why they became important? Because we wanted them to give us PPEs, right? We wanted them to supply safety, and every single person, every single company was struggling for PPE supplies during the pandemic. The rates were very high. So suddenly, the supplier categorization changed. You were talking more to the class C supplier. So there could be a possibility wherein we might have to reimagine how do we do the supplier, division now, in terms of the normal business, as well as in terms of the emergency situation. Uh, Other focus area has to be how do we automate more, and we'll be listening about that later from a couple of other experts. But yeah, automation in the processes, in the systems, that is something which should be looked upon. And simplification of the business is very, very important. What we have learned during the emergency, that not every procedure that we had laid down as a sourcing or a procurement person is required to be followed every time, right? Yes, there has to be a basic regulatory and corporate compliance. Apart from that, we have to tackle the emergency situation. So a lot of processes got simplified. So that's the other point I would say should be the trend or the focus area going forward. Yeah.
Pushpan, I think something I cannot hold myself. When you talked about the SRM, supplier relationship management. Now, supplier relationship management will do the spend analytic parts around the spend and the risk part. Now, when we have looked around many of the companies around the spend part, they don't have a coding system. So when you don't have the proper coding system, bring the category spend part of how accurate it is, how clean it is, how do you manage around all this? Do you think people have the right information?
So I agree, a lot of technology is still missing, a lot of coding is still missing, and that's where, a lot of intelligent tools are available in the market, which are quite affordable now. Definitely, there was a time when, people were talking about large ERPs and, the on-premise solution. The focus suddenly changed on to cloud-based solutions. So you have everything affordable now. So that intelligence, is quite easy to get. If you want to get data analytics tool, definitely they are easily available. But yeah, I would say coding and subcategory level knowledge is just one thing. It's not about just talking to the supplier, for the business that you are doing. It has to be a broader discussion. And, I'll give you one example in 30 seconds. When we were sourcing PPEs for, our around 40 odd cities across India, the challenge was when the whole country was locked down, who will distribute these PPEs to the driver? No one was allowed to do that. So we figured out security companies, who actually provide guards, they were allowed to place people because they wanted to the buildings and all. We reached out to a couple of them. We said, do you want to do that? I can tell you, most of them said, this is not our business model. The one who said, I won't mind doing this because I've never done this. And this is something which I have capability, I have capacity, but I've never done. So help me in doing that. We did that. Today, I can happily say that this company, which we kind of, tied up with, they have this vertical today. They are talking about distribution of even FMCG items also, right? So that fundamental shift has to happen when you start talking to, the suppliers to understand what are their capabilities.
Okay, great. Vijayanand, do you want to touch a little quickly on this, on coding part? Because I know you were involved in one of the areas.
Yeah, so let me start with the SRM aspect. Okay, so when we talk about SRM, supplier relationship management, our mind certainly talks about strategic suppliers and how do we manage strategic suppliers. Now, the question here is that so we do a good hard amount of work and we divide it by material code and vendor code and decide the categories and all, and then we start working towards it. And when we are working, we suddenly realize that there is a change happening in the vendor codes and material codes, where someone today was strategic will become tomorrow unimportant, and someone today unimportant will become strategic, right? So being on the move is very important. Two is that, why do we have this fancy that, okay, I will work with only two or three, four, five, six suppliers and then not with others? For all with whom we are not working might even grow bigger than our organization and or become a competitor to us rather than being strategic supplier to us. So these are the various things, supplier, we are always in a suppliers to supplier market. Having said that, you know rapid digitalization, like I would say, getting AI and ML is very important. And we as supply chain professionals, sometimes we take to this habit that, okay, you please give me a system, I will run it. But point is, we have to get on to a table where we say we will design systems. That is when the AI and ML would be more meaningful, to understand that, understand basic modeling that the computers do. And if I go and change certain parameters, how those models will be more predictive, that is meaningful to us, is very important. So upstream and downstream integration is very important. Let us not be in silos. That's the future.
Okay, good.
Having visibility end to end is very important. Losing visibility on one side and strategizing for the other side is really going to put us into trouble. So having visibility end to end, upstream, downstream, and being open in our minds to go ahead and work with different suppliers and different products is very important for us.
And Vijayanand, I think again, I'm coming back to you on the next one. Now, you talked about digitization, you talked about machine learning, AI, and I think the area where you are working around in Tata Technology, I think there's a focus on digitalization in a big way. So how do you see in the automation part, digitalization part, and is it really gaining the traction or not? Or is it still on the talks around what you're saying? And how are you planning to do the transformation part?
Yeah, it's digitalization is really gaining a lot of prominence. But the moment we talk about digitalization, we clearly sometimes misunderstand that, okay, let's have e-procurement, let's go ahead and deploy some ERP with some extension applications. And suddenly we go ahead and say that, let's go ahead and buy some tools which are available in the market and plug it in and look from others and do it. But before that, before we go and do that hasty decision, I would say that we need to clearly work on three things. One is, what is our network? What is our supply chain network? Let's understand that first, and how we can make it faster, flexible, accurate, and predictive. If we are able to understand that bit and increase visibility and do a comprehensive planning, is when we would really understand that what applications do we need that will support all these characteristics that I just mentioned. Having said that, always believe in driving more towards custom applications, because now digitalization is no more a standard product that is available, because some design which is made does not work for all industries. All industries and all companies are unique on themselves. But when you pick something, customize it to the usage that you want to. And there would be many ways to go ahead and do that. Let's do that. Now, when we go ahead and walk towards it, certain big things that we always hear, like hyper automation, blockchain, AI, IoT, ML, and continuous intelligence, all these big words we hear. But let's go ahead and start walking towards it rather than hearing to it and then waiting for someone to come and help us on it. I would say very simple thing, that when we are trying to say that it should be a touchless purchase order, it is very simple. Can we also think that the same touchless purchase order, can it be viewed by a vendor? And when a vendor wants to invoice, can he load an invoice against it? How difficult is it? But suddenly we will go ahead and call for certain ERP applications and try and implement, do a long journey. So this is something that, we all should think and get little more tech savvy. There's an IT team which would really, in every organization, when we bring up thoughts and ideas, they would always come and help. Those would be the baby steps where a supply chain professional would walk to go and be a high-tech professional in times to come. Other examples, if I have to give some tech savvy more examples, IBM's Pharma Connect or IBM's Food Center, that is a blockchain driven technology where, each farmer need not have their own technology. They can go and subscribe to it. And when they subscribe to it, all through the supply chain, whoever is receiving that particular product, whether a manufacturer or an end user, can have a visibility of that. Now imagine, where was the ERP or where was the tools around it? There are so many applications that are available. Let's learn how to adapt it. And another example today that Tatas are working on is we are developing a blockchain-based supply and monitoring technology for CCAM, which is Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms. What this would do is that the MSME companies in India can go ahead and adapt to it and talk to each other, both in terms of instant demand planning to go ahead and manufacture COVID related equipment, testing devices, and maybe going forward in terms of managing supply chain for transportation of vaccines. So there are many things that are happening in the market. We have to go and adapt to it. That is very important. Machine learning is more a topic which is more related towards demand planning, and so that we go and use it to go and predict. When I say machine learning, let's start small. You might deploy a simple Microsoft BI digital tool which only keeps telling you instantly from your ERP that what changes are happening today. And then if you go ahead and do a simple graph with a progressive equation, that itself is a basic model to start with. And then obviously when someone walks that path, he can walk on to the bigger aspects of doing realistic models. So digitalization is not something that is a tool driven, which is available in the market, just go buy and put it. It is about understanding what we want and understand the basic characteristics of the need of digitalization and convert that into custom built applications. That's the way to go, I would say.
If I understood you, Vijay, correctly, that means before we think of digitalization, we have to think of process plan. How will the process be there? So without the process, don't dump the system into the system.
Right. That would be the first baby step, I would say. And the second one is, get a little tech savvy, look for within the organization who can help you. And once you walk that path, I'm sure all the supply chain professionals are very good operations people, and they can get as much savvy as possible.
Great. Adya, I know you guys are in the process of transformation. Would you like to share some thoughts on transformation, what you are doing on digitalization part?
Oh, Mr. Weather, thank you. So, I'll just start by saying as procurement professionals, we've been talking about digitalization and technology for the last several years. And in my opinion, somewhere as compared to our peer functions, we've slackened in the adoption. It may vary slightly between industry to industry, but coming from a traditional energy and resource sector, I can clearly say that somewhere, whereas our operations colleagues have adopted IoTs and others a couple of years ago, we are still talking about how do we use AI ML in our procurement process. So really, what is important is to have a digital strategy in place, like we just talked about, knowing what you really want. Not just because of the fancy name that we want to jump on the digitalization bandwagon. We need to have a clear purpose, what we want to do, and what does our industry or our organizations need. So clearly, when we started off with a digital transformation program at Kane Oil and Gas, which is a oil and gas division of Vedanta Limited, we did several brainstorming sessions, workshops with all our stakeholders, and that was with finance, with IT, with our operations team, the user, the site, so that we could understand really, and of course the procurement people and supply chain. So what is it that we really need? And we drew up the whole digital strategy roadmap for the next couple of years to be implemented in phase wise. Now, I just wanted to share a few statistics. There was a survey which was done by Hackett, where they surveyed about 180 large companies, and only 32% companies had a digital strategy in place. So while 85% of the CPOs believed that they needed to have a digital strategy. So if you can see the big gap that is there between the need and actually being done. So unless you have a strategy, what is that you're going to implement? So to have a strategy was the phase one, and then we were in the middle of this transformation when this pandemic happened, and that only acted as a catalyst for us to speeden up our the adoption of this digital transformation. So we started off with the low hanging fruits, which were really looking at which are the transactional or the tactical work which can free up our resources. We are working in a very lean environment. How do we use our resources to do more, focus more on strategic activities? So we'll be using robotics and AI to free up the time to look at, so that kind of activities taken off from the plate. Secondly, what we know is that e-procurement, we have been talking about e-procurement for now ages, and most of the organizations currently are using e-procurement, but there are many functionalities which are available in the tools which are not getting used. How do we train our resources to use those functionality and become more productive? Use of e-commerce. We are talking about currently at Kane and Vedanta, we are doing almost 85% of our MRO spend is through touchless P2P process, right from the PR requisition to the payment. It's completely touchless. So we have reached that stage within a time span of almost 10 months, which is absolutely incredible. Talking from a sector that I come from, which is very traditional in mindset, having that kind of adoption is really quick and agile. So we have moved that curve. There are tools. Other thing that we spend a lot of time is drafting contracts. Our contracts typically on the capex side, from where I come, is runs into thousands, 2,000, 3,000 pages. It takes a huge amount of time just to do the negotiation, the terms and conditions, working with the legal teams and this, various teams to get that in place. There are technology available right now. How can we accelerate that process? Now we're reducing it from 3 months. We're doing that in weeks. So how the technology has really helped us in these areas. The other area we are talking about now is user experience. Earlier, we worked on ERPs, very cumbersome with all the T codes that you would have to memorize and use. Now we're talking about, very good dashboard kind of system, a very Amazon-like experience for a user to go and requisition something to the fulfillment and right up to the payment and the claim management, all these aspects. So that kind of things we are asking from our suppliers, that tools available in the market, and how do we utilize these tools. And lastly, I would talk also about the data and the analytics piece, which is really the oil of the next of the current times. So how do we harness the power of the data and analytics that is sitting in all our digital systems to make more decisive, or more fruitful decisions for the future. So these are a couple of things that we are working on. While we are on a transformation program, we also realize the importance of change management, which we will cover in the next segment, of how do we manage this change within the organization for its fruitful adoption?
Excellent, Adya. I think you touched very nicely. Then basically your focus is to provide to your customer Amazon type experience. We talked about the word e-tools. Now, many people I know that when I talk about the e-procurement part, yes, we have got it. So what tools you have got? They say ERP. Do you see ERP e-tools around for procurement? Adya, you want to say or someone else want to say?
No, I can take that. So definitely, yes. So when we talk about e-procurement, people do confuse with ERP. ERP is a very, it's like a basically for resource planning. But what we are talking as procurement professional is how do we use the power of web or the interconnectivity right from all the stages of your procurement, right from your, how collaboration with suppliers to your sourcing, to your negotiations, using of reverse auctions or, strategies, entire ambit that falls between the source to contract or source to pay cycle, moving on to a web-based platform and using the internet or the web for that kind of connectivity. So that's where we are looking at, we're talking about industry 4.0. How do we move to a supply chain or a procurement 4.0 is what we need to think about. And that's where we need to move, use of technology and digitalization in that case.
Excellent, Adya, you said around. Because to me, ERP is procurement 2.0. ERP
Yes.
enterprise system. Nothing more than this. Connect is more for accounts people to manage the resources part. But when you go to the next level, which is procurement 3.0, that's where the e-procurement comes. And when we talk of procurement 4.0, we're talking of digital technology. That's what come to that around. So I thought we need to different things around. Okay, guys, let's move to the next one. I think which is very important question again. So here we're talking about again strategic. I know many of my other panelists also have talked about strategic parts, strategic procurement, strategic supply chain. So here I'm going to ask again Vivek, who has worked with again Apple and others, how you see around strategic procurement, the trends in that area, strategic procurement and strategic supply chain.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Batra. Yeah, so definitely, as has come through from the feedback and comments from my peers here, it's easy to see that supply chain and procurement has already transitioned to and is rapidly moving towards being a more of a strategic function versus just a tactical function. So what I mean by that is, one, the operations team, the procurement teams is moving from the factory floors into the C-suites. They are getting a seat at the table, and they the role of the supply chain teams is not only execution now, but as the questionnaire says, a lot more to do with strategy. What that means is that now the companies are proactively thinking of, how do I best procure my material? Where do I procure it from? Who's giving me, let's say, a more favorable price? How much should I procure? Like, should I have 4 weeks of supply that I should be sitting on? Should I have 1 quarter's worth of supply? What works for my business? For something like a semiconductor business, you might need wafers way ahead of time, whereas for something like Apple manufacturing phones, you just need to procure a hard drive maybe a week before you have to build that phone, right? So those decisions can be different for different products and different industries, but those are the key questions that are being asked. And why that is happening is because all of these are now directly affecting the books of all the companies, how profitable you are, what's your cash that's trapped to all the inventory that you're sitting on, and conversely, what's your free cash flow, what's your EBITDA. All these things are markers of whether a company is financially sound or not, and how it is perceived in the stock market, which is eventually what it is all about. So these things are not only affected by how much can you sell and what price can you sell at, but how efficiently can you plan, and what are the deals that you can get by being smart and strategic about procuring and building and storing inventory. So that's a big trend that has been going on for quite some time, and it's only going to get even stronger in times to come.
Excellent, Vivek. I think you touched on the point of liquidity part. I can see Apple is number one in the world in terms of liquidity and cash, which used to be the Microsoft in the good old days. Nowadays, Apple around. That's why the valuation of
Yeah,
Apple is $2 trillion, $1.8 trillion as a valuation.
yeah, and that is their strategy, and just that is by the sheer scale of Apple. But they are able to negotiate deals with the vendors where they say that even though you have built the supply, you are storing the supply, you are buying the supply, for me, I am not going to own it. Like there are I can't disclose the exact terms, but even after a phone, let's say, has been built by the vendors in China and it is sitting in the US for some time, it is still not Apple inventory. It is still not on Apple's books. So that is a strategic decision, and that has huge implications both for the vendor as well as for a company like Apple.
Okay, guys, now let's switch over to Vijayanand on the same issue on strategic part, how you guys are managing.
Right. Yeah. So I would say, you know, to get strategic, there are four things that we should be doing. But before I head there, we all love to say that supply chain and procurement is strategic. We all wish that, someday my senior management comes and tells, oh, you're a strategic function. We all wish that, all the other forums will come and say, oh, you are a strategic function. We all wish that we want a table, a seat at the table at the C level, and we wish the CEO and CFO asks us things, and then we call ourselves strategic.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. That will never happen, because we are running operations, and till the time we just run operations, that's not going to happen. If we talk about pricing, if we talk about savings, if we talk about delivery, and we start working after the demand comes in, that's not going to take us to be strategic. The day we walk into the CFO's office and ask him, what is your problem today? Can I help you? And then when I understand whether cash is a problem, cost is a problem, and then when I look at cash, when I say that, okay, how much of cash is being utilized to go ahead and manage our supplies, and what is the terms and days? For all a CFO might say, I don't mind paying it tomorrow as long as the cost is much lower. Or there could be another CFO who would say, no, I need my deliverable at the marketplace, and still I have not paid any cash or booked any cost for it. So when we go and ask these questions and try to tweak our operations to help, is when we get strategic. Now, when we talk about delivery, today the product life cycles are very small. If I can go ahead and ask the delivery and help them to find alternatives, to help them introduce a new technology which is available in the marketplace, give them more options, open up their minds, because I'm the person who's connecting the outside world to inside, right? If that's when I get strategic. One industry experience. What is this? It is not about, it's about rising up to industry 4.0. When we say industry 4.0 and supply chain 4.0, it is not a tool or a digital or technology. Obviously those things come in the way, but the first is the thinking. Now, if I start collaborating with my suppliers, the moment I think of a purchase order and the supplier starts manufacturing it, even before my e-procurement PO goes, and the supplier ships the material with a certain indication, whether it's a digital or AI based trigger, that is when we go ahead and rise up to supply chain 4.0. The classic case, of course, on a little on the funnier side, the vaccines in Pune, which was supposed to go to all over India, reaches the airport, but the government has not given a purchase order, right? So that is a typical scenario that happens in our organizations. Let's not blame it the environment. It happens with us, So we will tell the supplier, hey, don't supply without the purchase order. And at the same time, I'll call the supplier, okay, you ship it. Supplier is most confused.
Yeah.
Right? So that collaboration, that digital connect is very important. So the other third one is, can we simplistically on an Excel sheet develop something called as digital supply chain twin? Why I call it as supply chain twin is because today I know how my processes work. I go ahead and draw a parallel process which says, no, it should work in a certain other fashion That would be really helpful. That would be really futuristic. And develop a twin and see that today how I can move my current supply chain process to the twin. And similarly, keep developing twins every other day and keep asking your team to go and develop one for you. And that is when we get strategic. So once again, I would like to cover it up by saying that, be getting strategic, being called strategic is not going to help. Three things. One, go ahead and ask what makes us strategic. Two, perform things which is strategic. And three is go ahead and do get towards digitalization, where I see some questions popping up in the chat saying, how can I get more tech savvy? How can I get more digital in and how can I improve my career path? These are some of the questions that's coming in the chat. So a short answer to it is, you need not go ahead and start going to learn certain codes or certain things or whatever it is. Just look in the environment, develop a digital twin on a plain paper, try to then move from the plain paper to an Excel sheet, to a tool, to a ERP, and to a customized application. That's the way and path on to travel this particular journey. There are good number of tools in the marketplace, good number of IT interventions. Seek help, collaborate within your organization, be proactive. That's what is going to make a big change.
Excellent, Vijayananda. You touched a very good point on collaboration, cross-function part. I think that is very critical around. You can't do in silos these things around. Excellent. Let's move down to the next one, which I'm asking again for the Brishpan before he answers. Let me say that when I see the journey of 70s, when I started my career with Tata's, procurement was just a purchasing function. From purchasing, we became procurement. From procurement, we became strategic procurement. From strategic, we became category management. And now we are talking of value addition. This whole journey sounds wonderful. Now, each company may have a different source, but this is where I want Brishpan to help us to understand what steps should be taken to complete this journey, particularly which COVID-19 has told us, guys, you have to move into value adding function. Yeah, Brishpan.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I know Vijay did mention very few important things, related to this question. I'll also talk about, something of the similar nature. Yes, I mean, the function has definitely shifted, wherein we are a very important function of, the organization who has, the head of, say, procurement or sourcing in place. We have our own policy, which we try to, put in the whole organization, wherein we collaborate a lot with finance people also. So all those things are happening fine. But to become a value chain, one has to become the part of the business also. And to become a part of the business, that what a person required today is the business acumen along with the sourcing acumen. If you're just acting as a function saying, if there is a requirement and I will help in catering to that requirement and you should value me for that, that has to change. Before someone comes to you with a requirement, why can't we understand what is the business doing, where is the path of the business, and where I can contribute at the planning stage itself, when someone is planning, say, sales forecasting or planning a new product itself. So that change has to happen, wherein you have to look at the 360 degrees here, collaborate with the sales people, collaborate with the finance people more, and try to understand where the organization is heading to. And the moment you start talking to them for improving the business of the organization, automatically that connect will happen. And mostly this is a top driven agenda. And when you look at what are the priorities for the topmost people in the organization, they want to either increase the revenue of the organization or improve the cost of operation of the organization. So start contributing into that, and automatically you will be valued. Second, being an important contributor in the organization as a function, the focus I believe should be, how do you reduce the speed of the transaction? And I know Adya mentioned about that there was a time then, it used to take 6 months to do a contract, or 3 months. Today, you take hardly 2 to 3 weeks to do a contract because there is a technology available. But I would say along with technology, there was a mindset also which actually brought that technology. And it was definitely, I'm assuming, the sourcing people who brought that. The moment you start reducing the speed of transaction in the organization, start doing that along with, reduced cost or optimal cost with a high quality output, definitely that connect will improve and you will be really valued function in the organization. In last have few procedures, and I still remember, Vijay, you questioning this almost 2 years back. I still remember that why do we need 3 quotes every time, right? If there is an emergency situation, you don't have to do that. You just have to react and support the organization than just pushing your policy. I remember hearing that in Mumbai, and I'm very supportive of this. You have to be very, very flexible, right? Where the business is going, be flexible. Sometimes you might have to explore additional suppliers. Sometimes you have to react so fast that business feel that yes, they were really valued and there was no breakdown in the business. So this is how I would say the value can be created.
Good. Brishpan, I think you touched a very good point around, I think this is a top driven, basically. If you want the success of this activity around moving to the value chain, there has to be the blessing from the top. If they're not top driven, you may be wasting too much time on this. This is what you wanted to convey them. Okay, guys, let's move to the next one. That's how do you see the importance of supply chain and procurement integration? Because supply chain as it is today, as I said to you, still standalone logistics only, or maybe something else. But if I look from demand planning up to the customer CRM, end to end, if you want a visibility, how do you see the importance of this? So before that, I want to tell Vivek, you want to touch on this? And then Vijay and
Yeah,
Andre.
sure. Yep. So, as has been apparent, it's come up many times. You cannot work in silos. You need to have the visibility from end to end. And to the extent where I would say that I see procurement as a part of supply chain. It should not be, supply chain and procurement need to be integrated. Your supply chain begins with you starting to source material, and that is the procurement function. You're working with the suppliers all the way to demand planning, to supply planning, working with the factories and the logistics. All of those you need to have an end-to-end visibility across all those functions. And the reason for that is, to give a real world example, um, if you are trying to, let's say, manufacture phones, and you know that you have certain amount of material for the space gray iPhone chassis that is being built, and you know how much you are able to procure, what the terms of those procurements are, and what your stockpile is, but you don't have visibility into what the plans for the quarter are, uh, for the space gray versus, for example, the red material, right? The red phone or the gold phone. Your decision making based on those demand plans and then based on the supply plans is going to be not as quick as it would be if you have end-to-end visibility. Now, that does not mean that every person in all these organizations has the visibility to through across all four of these functions, but you need to have the ability, where there is they should go under the same umbrella so that there can be a quicker decision making based on how your demand plans are coming in, what your factories are able to support, and what your logistics functions are able to support. So to have a more profitable and more flexible organization, as has been highlighted, is the need of the hour. You need to have those functions fully integrated with the complete transparency from one end to the other.
Excellent. Vijay, you want to touch on this point again?
Yeah. So supply chain is the only thing that is there, I would say, which is running from source to pay, which is one angle of it. The other angle is source to deliver, right? When you source components, you work on those and you go and modify them and then go and deliver that, right? So source to deliver and source to pay. Most of the times procurement professionals live within the source to pay and not within the source to deliver part. But for supply chain management includes the whole thing, the source to deliver, where there is a financial line of pay as well. There should not be, I would say there should be a day that would come where procurement is not called as procurement is also supply chain management. Now, end-to-end visibility is very important. And today, if there is no end-to-end visibility, if a supply chain person gets to know that on a daily, on a real-time basis, that what's the inventory level. He can always question the demand that is coming in. At the same time, if there's a digital way where the demand is integrated with the inventory that we are holding, then the procurement professional need not do anything. The systems would digitally collaborate with the supplier and manage the inventory. So that's the importance of integrated procurement in supply chain. Data centralization is the key to go and get this achieving. And being profitable is also very important. And to be profitable, a procurement professional should have a visibility from the left to right, and a supply chain professional or the operations professional should have a view of what is the dynamic pricing that's happening in the market. Both the sides should be pulling each other, and that is very important. There was one question from Guru Sachdev questioning, product branding, restructuring, and diversification. This is a very important thing, and I would try to tweak this a little bit and present it differently. Rainmakers are very important. Generally, salespeople are called as rainmakers, but at the end of the day, if we can go ahead and convert ourselves from a cost to a profit-making function and focus on profits, that would really bring a tectonic shift. And have a little bent of mind to be a rainmaker or to generate a revenue or to influence a sale. That is very much important. And once we start approaching that particular aspect, I would say that we are successfully integrated.
Excellent. Now, Vijay, before I close on this session, now the next one is on the project part. On the project part, do you see the project management as a part of the supply chain in the future?
Yes. So why I would say is on two aspects. One is most of the times, production of a product was more of an assembly line kind of a scenario. Delivering of a service was an assembly line kind of scenario. But situations change and everything becomes project. Now, more and more production is in terms of project. Today, if you see even in the automobile industry, the life cycle or the lifetime of one particular model of a car is shrinking. Earlier, a model comes out, you keep modifying it, and and you continue with that particular model for 10 years, that platform for 10 years, then the suppliers related to it for 10 years. Now there is so much of competition that is shrinking. So all I'm trying to say is that most of it is going to be kind of a project. Now, before the project starts, how the supply chain management a professional can influence is in the NPD, where he brings the outside in knowledge, what's happening in the market, what other vendors are doing, what other suppliers are doing. That is on the start of it. And during running that particular project, he understands the beat and the rhythm of that particular project, understands the speed in which it has to be done and deliver. And the final part is when we go and shift from one project to another project. That is where we do. Otherwise, typically, if you look at other IT companies, all delivery happens on a project basis. Everyone is unique. The unique adaptation of uniqueness for each different project and running centrally the supply chain itself is a big challenging task, and we should review it from that perspective rather than running it like a typical assembly line.
Thank you, Vijay. I think let me switch over to Nadia. The question comes on upskilling and reskilling. All these changes that we're talking around mindset and new technologies, around new transformations. Ultimately, we need to upskill the staff around. We need to reskill them also. So keeping this mind, basically before we go to the next normal. So Adia, you want to share some thoughts on this?
Thank you, Mr. Batra. So I think today we have spoken a lot about the importance of resilience and flexibility to adapt. So and procurement function really has to move from delivering cost savings to providing a strategic edge to the organization. And to build a holistic supply chain and to drive cost reduction, procurement has to utilize the maximum out of digital technologies. We've spoken so much, we spent almost 50% of the time today talking about digital technologies. It's like most of the procurement leaders believe that the team do not have sufficient capabilities to deliver on the digital procurement strategy. And hence there is a lot of the organizations, particularly the procurement function, is going to focus a lot on finding the right talent for the right role, at the same time grooming the in-house resources through specially designed training and skill development programs and competency development programs. The procurement professionals would definitely need to acquire the critical skills to succeed in a digital world and to remain relevant in the market. We see a lot of and the second part of it, the other side of the coin is that while we see that a lot of transactional work in procurement function is being automated, as a result, what is happening is a lot of extra time is available due to automation, which can be deployed by the resources for more strategic function and that the business needs. So we need to wear a different hat now. How do we think more like strategic partners of the business instead of just be driving the cost? I'll just share a few examples from my organization, how we are currently trying to create that culture of change, because this is not an overnight shift that you can do. It's a cultural shift that you need to bring. It's a paradigm shift that we need to think about. It's how you change your language. So currently now in our organization, we stop talking procurement people. We don't talk in terms of cost savings. If we do have to report savings, we talk savings as a percentage of revenue. What is our contribution to the margin protection? So these are the terminologies that we're using to drive that mindset that, look, we are not just cost drivers of the company, but we are strategic in the operations of the company and getting the revenue. How do we impact the EBITDA of the company? So that mindset, that has to be a top-driven approach to bring that cultural change. A is towards driving towards technology adoption, and second is to think like a strategic partner in the organization. Now currently we see procurement is not just doing negotiations. We are involved in policy advocacy. We are involved in how do we look at various financing models, improvement of working capital. So these are key themes which are going around in the procurement world right now, which is not purely just cost reduction. So these changes require change management, and I will just quickly talk about the change management, which is very, very important. This is not easy. It brings, why? Because it brings a sense of insecurity about the end state, and there's a resistance to undertake these kind of these initiatives amongst the people. So how do we make it smooth for the teams, for the people, for even the leadership to really acknowledge these changes and then adapt these changes in their day-to-day work? And this is a gradual process which will take time, but this is the need of the hour. And I think most of the people right now, organizations are talking about it. So it's just a matter of time that we see this change coming.
Thank you, Adi. I think the key message, what you're trying to say, is not the focus only on the saving part, cost saving. Change the mindset from there to saving and the revenue also.
Absolutely.
When the revenue around. So that means the percentage of revenue, how it is there. So that means connected to the revenue and the bottom line, both places.
Absolutely. When you start talking in these language, you change the mindset. So communication and top-driven approach is important.
Excellent. I think now let's move to the next one. So panel part discussion is over. Now we are coming to the next one, is the Q&A sessions. I know we are already, time is over, but never mind. If one or two people want to raise up the question, they can raise the hand and start asking question open. Yeah. Anyone has got? Please come up. Anyone's? If none, then let me put this way around. I mean, looking at the time, I know it's a short. So you guys can send us the questions separately. We'll be very happy to share with the panelists and then answer you back. Dr. Saroj, you are there?
In a question. My only thing is, how does a supplier, how does a vendor, how does a manufacturer in all this new change feel comfortable? Whether it is organizational change, whether it is strategic change, where it is what is digitally we are trying to improve, we are changing our policies. But what is the comfort level? Has anybody measured that between these three people in the supply chain? That would be very important. Yeah. Yes, Vijay.
Right. So it's a very interesting question that, around organization behavior and organization development with respect to supply chain, right? if this question was posed in January 2020, it was different. And if you're posing this question now,
Yes.
the situation is very different. In 2020, we need to think about it. We will work on it. We will do things later. Have you put it in the plan? But if you talk now, they say that they don't expect that a change is supposed to be discussed and brought in. Here, the organizations believe that now they are changing and they have to change. And from all aspects, whether it's a human behavior or a supply chain or a finance.
Excellent. So, Roj, could I put back to you, because since you are heading the business school, so are you changing any course curriculum for the upcoming students, keeping in mind this 2020 and 21 lesson, whatever?
Yes, incidentally, we have done a lot. We have made so many changes. I just submitted a paper tonight, earlier in the day, in fact,
Okay.
and that was how we would like to look at blockchain and design thinking. Basically, we are doing all design thinking. We are doing revamping. We are doing re-engineering. We are doing value addition to the 2020 and 2021. So it is like that. So along with that, yes, course curriculums have also changed, like manufacturing strategies have changed. But one thing you did not touch is that we were big businesses. We are now going towards squeezing towards smaller SBUs or small business types. So nobody, neither I got a Tata experience nor Brisbane did mention anything, and Dr. Sharma did talk about it. So that would also be an interesting question that I would like to get a response, seek a response. Yeah.
Let me put another one, which is very close to my heart. We all went to the MBAs in operation management. But don't you think now the time has come, operation management is part of the supply chain? It should be MBA in supply chain, and operation should be one part of it. But while in India, everybody is still doing MBA in operations. Dr. Saroj, you want to say something? But since you are attached with academic.
Absolutely. It needs to be changed. We have to think otherwise. Yeah.
But there are some universities now which have moved towards MBA in supply chain.
Right.
Operation, not the other way around.
That's right.
Yeah, there are many. And the other thing about the function is also getting smaller. These days, the boundary lines of calling a procurement function, supply chain function, and a finance and a operations and a sales function, the boundary lines are getting slimmer. So, and also the function sizes are getting smaller because of digitalization. So I think that is bound to happen and everyone is facing that.
One interesting thing, just 1 minute, right? So one is interesting thing I'll talk about is in last 7 to 8 months, I've been approached by, the topmost business schools, I would say, a couple of IIMs, MDIs and all, wherein they want their operations people to listen to supply chain folks, right? And I got, some of the questions that we answered today. They want to understand how supply chain and the overall operations of the company can work together. So that shift is already happening. And I never saw that happening, I would say prior to COVID. Suddenly people are asking different questions. So there is a change happening at the management school level also.
Good. Okay, guys, it's already 12:15. So without taking much time of yours, I want to thank you all the panelists for taking their time, and particularly those who are based in now Canada's and US. So I will again thank to all of you. Vijayanand, thanks again for joining us. Brishban, thanks for joining us. Adyas, Dr. Vivek, Dr. Saroj Kaul. And thanks to all the participants. I think it was very well attended. I could say we had around 350 people who were registered for it. I know. So that's the way we look around. Thanks for everyone. Take care.